Hello and welcome to Life Beyond the Numbers, the podcast for people who are curious about how to have a more fulfilling work life. We live in a world largely driven by numbers, logic and reason. But how we feel at work and about our work impacts us, our organisations and society. There is a relationship between the numbers of our organisations and the life beyond the numbers. I'm Susanne Ni Chriodain, your host. I've lived and worked in many countries. I've met people who love what they do and people who don't, people who bring their full selves to work and people who won't. But one thing that I've learned that is common to us all is that we are all unique and have unique experiences. And it's helpful to know that there are others who think like we do, or have had struggles too, or have gone where we want to go, or can show us things we didn't know. So join me and my guests as we place a lens on the human side of work life by sharing insights, stories and strategies to inspire you to let your uniqueness shine through. Well, today I am delighted to be joined by me, actually. Today, the tables are being turned, basically, on Life Beyond the Numbers. And I am delighted that Dr. Susanne Evans is taking time out of her day to interview me for my own podcast, Life Beyond the Numbers, on my book, Leading Beyond the Numbers. I mean, there's definitely a theme here.
There definitely is. I'm very, very happy to be here. I'm very excited to talk to you about your book.
That's so cool. And before we turn the tables completely, I just wanted to say that this episode is going out on Saturday, May 11th, 2024. And on Tuesday, May 14th, my book actually launches into the world. Woohoo! I keep thinking of a rocket. It's not quite. I don't think it's going to have that kind of impact. But there's something about pressing publication or publish that's kind of cool. And on Monday, May 13th, if you're listening to this, obviously earlier in May rather than later, we'll be doing a LinkedIn Live to celebrate this achievement, this launch, this milestone. And also, the book is available for sale on all leading retailers, but on Amazon, the ebook is 99p until the end of Monday. So if you're on the fence about reading it, what's 99p or 99 cents? It really is not a lot. It's definitely value for money, even if I say so myself.
No, I would agree. Definitely value for money.
And you can also help the rocket take off. You can get the launch going. So I would be very, very grateful. And of course, if you do read the book, I'd love to hear what you think about it and what struck you most and any takeaways and so on. And maybe we can start a conversation. Before I take up all of this conversation on my own, I'm going to hand over to Susanne, who will take the reins. Over to you, Susanne.
Thank you. As I said, it's very exciting. I loved the book. I know you know this already, but I just enjoyed every bit of it, but also I was really surprised at how emotional I felt whilst I was reading it and how I had real ups and downs of emotions while I read it. I laughed, I cried, everything else in between. It's just a wonderful book. So get out there and read it, everybody. Buy it for your friends. It's just the best book. But I wanted to ask you, what inspired you to start this process? Because writing a book isn't easy. I know you've been juggling all your normal day job and everything else alongside it. So what was the moment when you thought, I need to write a book and this is what I need to do it about?
So actually, COVID, lockdown, like lots of people, I think, we thought, oh, I'm going to have all of this time on my hands. And I had just started my business and it just wasn't the time to start pushing my business because the people I wanted to work with, I knew would be really, really busy. So I thought, let me write a book. How do I do that? Somebody mentioned somebody called Alison Jones, and I signed up to do a
writing retreat, an online virtual writing retreat for 2 weeks. And then I went on to do a proposal, and I did the whole plot out the book, think about the book, how you write it and everything, the structure, blah, blah, blah. And I hated the book that I was going to write. And not only that, I actually changed my whole business idea after putting that concept together, which was really helpful. So nothing's ever wasted. That's what I believe. Nothing's ever wasted. And then I thought, what do I really want to do? What am I really thinking about here? And that's where the concept for this book came about. And so 2 years later, in 2022, I signed up to do the book proposal again with Alison. And in that, I really teased out the concept. And I knew that that was the book I was meant to write.
Wow. That's so interesting, because I absolutely agree with you. Nothing's ever wasted. And I think often if it shows us the path we don't want to take or we shouldn't take, in a way, that's even more useful than where it shows you the path. You kind of get that feeling, don't you, that this is right. This is the right book for me. Fascinating. So I'm interested to know, if people haven't read the book, how would you summarize the book for them? What is the key premise of what you're trying to get across in the book?
I've thought a lot about this, and it's funny when you write a book, because you're in the process of writing one.
I am, yeah.
You want everyone to know everything.
Yes.
And you think nothing's wasted, and it's about all of these things. And I think the thing that struck me the most today as I thought about this is that variation is the norm. That actually we're all unique, we are all different, and even how we approach learning and decision making, we're all different. And in our workplaces, we're often conformed into doing things a certain way, and it may not suit us. Your uniqueness is unique to you, and you don't need to compare yourself to anyone else. Of course, we have to fit into job roles, and we have to do things that we may not be all that good at, or whatever, they mightn't be our strengths. But we are unique, and we have gifts that are worth finding and bringing to life. And because of that, what you see on the outside and what you see on the inside is unique too. And you don't know what's inside anyone else. So there's variation there as well. And you don't know what anyone's feeling moment to moment, day to day. Even if they're smiling, they may not be smiling on the inside. So there's a variation between what you see on the outside of a person and what's going on in the inside. And I just don't think that most of us think like that. We kind of take for granted that the face that we have on is how we're presenting ourselves to the world, and what you see is what you get. But it's very often not the case. So I think there's variation between our inner world and our outer persona. And there's variation in how all of us approach work and are at work. And I think if people, all of us, me included, can understand that better, then it makes life easier for people.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think for me, there's this desire for order and process in the workplace. And you talk about measurement and metrics, and how as leaders and managers, that's what we want to do, and that's what organizations do. And yet there's a lot of other things going on under the surface that aren't being measured and aren't being looked at. I wonder sometimes if it's because it's easier to focus on those things that are quantifiable, and actually the other things, the variation and the emotions, are harder. So we kind of put it into the too difficult pile and don't do anything about it. Don't try and investigate it and get underneath what's really going on.
That is one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is that just for so long, Susanne, we weren't really encouraged to bring our whole selves to work.
True.
And I think this comes from assembly lines and so on, where everything was done on an assembly line. And in some places it still is, and you have to do jobs that way. If you're going to make tins of tuna, then you might as well have them on an assembly line and have everything done the same way all the time. There's no point in reinventing the wheel. But if you're sitting in an organization and you're hoping to come up with the next best thing to Tesla or whatever it is, you've got to be able to bring parts of yourself into it. And your emotional side, or your emotions, will help you to harness different things. I mean, even with anger, for example, if you work in an NGO and it's about climate change, harnessing some of your anger towards the fact that there's no proper whatever going on for climate change is helpful. So I think it's horses for courses, isn't it? It's bringing the right parts of ourselves forward for the right roles and right jobs and right tasks. And it's not just being angry for the sake of being angry to annoy everyone else or anything like that. It's not, it's okay to throw your toys out of the pram. It's not, it's never okay. You have to have an appropriate to the context and situation way of behaving, because we have to get on with each other as well.
I think, and that idea of bringing the whole self, I know there's been a lot of talk post-COVID that people felt because you were seeing someone's home behind them on a Zoom screen, that brought more of their personal life into the workplace. And I think there's an aspect of that, isn't there, in terms of kids wandering in and out, dogs wandering in and out. But I wonder how much difference it's actually made in really bringing one's whole self to work. It's different seeing someone's Zoom backdrop because that's curated, isn't it? Unless you have a dog bursting in, which happens to me quite regularly. But, you know, people curate their backdrop. I still don't think you're seeing everything of a person.
But do you want to?
I don't know. I mean, I think you're right. It's that authenticity and feeling comfortable to be yourself at work. That's the key, isn't it?
I think so. It's less about, you don't need to see all of me.
No.
Nobody does, even.
No one needs that.
No one needs that. And I think it's not about how I live that impacts what I do. So we also have to separate the person that we're in front of from judging their surroundings or how they dress or what their house looks like or doesn't look like. And it's not about comparing again. The way I always think about it is we all get up in the morning, we go to the toilet, we brush our teeth, we have our breakfast. There are so many things we do every single day that are the same. And you don't need to hide that. Obviously, you're not going to bring someone to the toilet with you and stuff like that. I don't mean it like that, but you know what I mean? It's like, there's nothing wrong with that. That's the human way. And so having understanding, compassion, empathy for the fact that some of us find some of these things harder to do, takes us longer to get up or down the stairs. Some of us have obsessive compulsive disorders. Some of us don't like to drive, only want to take the bike. There are so many things that people have that are important to them and that they value. Let them decide what they want to share with you. So I don't think it's being transparent for the sake of it or showing your whole self. It's really about, can I relate to you as another human being? And that requires me coming across like a human being as well.
Yes.
It's not enough to say you be your whole self and I'm going to be a closed book, because why would I open up to you if I don't think you're going to open up back? I'm going to be suspicious that you're going to use it against me.
I always think it's like treating people like grown-ups, isn't it? As you say, being human, but also everyone at work's a grown-up. We should treat them that way. I think so many workplaces infantilize people where it's like, we're not going to tell them anything, or oh, there's things going on, but we mustn't tell them because they'll get upset. I work in the world of organisation change. There's a lot of that going on. And I think part of what you're saying as well is that idea that we had to take responsibility for ourselves and our own actions. We have to expect others to do the same, and we have to treat people well and in a human fashion.
It's really simple, isn't it?
Why doesn't everyone do this, Susan? Why is this not happening?
Well, in one way, I'm kind of glad it isn't, because I wouldn't have been able to write a book.
No, that's true. It will happen now. Now that you've written the book, it will all be fine.
Yes, my dad was saying that there's going to be a seismic shift in how we work, you know.
I don't disagree with him.
I think there's a few things. I think one is the Industrial Revolution into what we were just talking about, the assembly line approach and so on. Another is women weren't really in the workforce before the 70s, you could say. I mean, they were, but it's even the 80s. I mean, even when I started work in 96, the previous year was the first year that women didn't have to wear skirts to work.
Yeah.
They were allowed to wear trousers in the professional services. Work was very old-fashioned. You left your work at the door as well, I think, and you went home. Whereas now, because of online and computers, that's changed, and there's no such thing as leaving things in a little box and coming back to it and opening it back up. And also because work has changed, the nature of work has changed so fundamentally that if you were making parts for something or tens of tuna, like I said earlier, that's what you were doing. It's very, very straightforward. But like the work you do, Susanne, if you go into an organization and you want to help them change how they're doing something fundamentally, it's more than just what's in that room that matters. It expands out into how people are coming into the office, how they feel about their work, themselves, their colleagues, what their home life is like, because that impacts. Then that impacts onto their community, society. And I actually think this disengagement in work, this lack of feeling like doing our best, has a huge impact beyond the workplace. There's a mutual relationship there that you cannot treat one without treating the other. And there's a lot of unhappiness in the world. There's a lot of disengagement in the workplace. There's a lot of upheaval and uncertainty. And I do think there's a symbiotic relationship because people are at the center of it all.
And you can't leave it at the door. I think anything that's going, we all know from our own personal experiences, if there's something going on in our personal lives, it's hugely difficult to switch that off and go into work and act normal. It's really difficult. And yet we expect people to do it. We expect people to just carry on. And I think you're right. This model of leadership and management, which we are still seeing in the workplace, dates back to a time when work was very different. And like you, I had the experience of joining a professional services firm in the late 90s, and we were not allowed to wear trousers to begin with. Again, it's dehumanizing the workplace, isn't it? So I think there's a long way to go. But what I loved about your book is I think it gives people a really great toolkit for moving themselves and their organisation forward. So thinking really critically about the way they do things, but then it's very practical. So it's got practical things that you can do. It's not just theory, it's stuff you can do for yourself and for others to move that dial so that we're creating this more human, emotion-centred workplace.
And even emotion-centred, I think it's about bringing emotions in, isn't it? But it's not about shoving reason and logic out.
No, it's both. You've got to have both.
You've got to have both. And emotions help us learn and connect, challenge. We need to be able to switch between those two sides in a way that helps move places forward and brings people along. And I know myself, going to work, all I've ever wanted to do is my best. You know, I've until it isn't, you know, and then it's time to leave. But you want to contribute, you want to be heard, you want to be seen, you want to move the needle forward, you want to explore things. You don't want to be shut down. You don't want to feel afraid to speak up. And I think we've still got a long way to go. But I do think we all have some personal responsibility towards moving that. I don't think we can just blame the situation we're in or the leaders or anything like that. It's too easy. And I was reminded of this so clearly earlier this week. I was at a CrossFit class, and after you've read the book, you know I'm a bit CrossFit obsessed. But I always love that I get an analogy for something. And I was at CrossFit on Wednesday morning, and we were doing what they call an EMOM, which is every minute on the minute. And every minute on the minute, you change an exercise. And there were so many of us, they had to split us into different groups. And I realized that we were all starting at a different exercise. But what I didn't realize was we were all going to end up on the same one. I don't even know how they did that, but I wasn't paying attention to that part. So the last one was a box jump. So I'm doing my exercises, only 2 others with me, and we're going through each of these, and I get to the 5th one, which is the last one, and everybody's on a box. And I look at the coach and I said, they've all gone wrong. And the coach looks at me and he's like, no, you're all supposed to be on boxes now. I realized that actually, rather than wondering where I had gone wrong, my assessment of that situation was everyone else was in the wrong. And I took no responsibility for my part in that.
Oh, hilarious. I think my reaction would have been the same. What's the matter? Why are these people? They know nothing.
And it was so funny. And I think that's so normal for us to think like that as well. It's so normal. And I think we just have to stop sometimes and say, did I have anything to do with that? Am I a common denominator here, or did I contribute to that? And I don't think it's about taking the blame or anything, but I think it's very easy to just say they're all wrong and I'm the one that's right, or they've all got the wrong idea, or they didn't listen to the instructions properly.
It's noticing, isn't it? I think that's the first part of creating any kind of behavior change, which I guess is what you're asking people to consider through reading the book, that if things aren't working for you at the moment, the way you're doing things, then here's an alternative. And the first step, I always think, is just noticing exactly as you did. Oh, that's what I did. And that's, I think, is a great first step, isn't it, to creating change? Because most of the time we just drift around and do things and we don't even notice. So if people, as a result of reading your book, start to notice these situations, that's fantastic, isn't it?
It is. And I think then there's noticing and there's been able to laugh about it as well.
Yeah.
We take work so seriously, and laughter is a great way of giving ourselves permission to not be so hard on ourselves, because we will all tend to self-criticize and get annoyed and get angry and go, oh God, I messed up there. And most of the time, nobody even notices except for you. So I think noticing is important, but it's important for you. And it's important for you to take a step forward in a right way and not in a backwards step or in a, they're all looking at me and laughing at me.
Yes. Yeah, it's noticing to move forward, isn't it? Rather than using it as a tool for self-critique, which we all do enough of anyway, right?
Exactly.
So you've got this wonderful podcast. I was wondering if there were particular guests you'd had on or stories that you'd heard that really helped you formulate some of the things you wanted to think about in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. Without a doubt. It's almost like stepping stones at times when I look back at some of the episodes that even came together. Like there are 3 episodes that went out last year in May. I can't remember the numbers of them now, but there was Professor Gianna Eckhart, Anna Bernardes, and Kerry Cullen. And with them, I was exploring things like slowing down and embodied movement or embodiment and things around emotions and also about the nervous system. Those 3 episodes really helped me hang some of my concepts around, which was really interesting. I hadn't started writing then, but the fact that they came together like that as well. And then some of the stories that people told. So there was one episode with Joe Hunter, and again, I can't think of the name or the number of it, but it's about being yourself, and the way she talked about how she had been as a child and free to express herself and so on when we spoke, and then later on in life denying that part of herself until it kind of burst out of her. And it was just one of those stories that I knew I had to include in the book and it would just find its place. And there was another one with a guy called Eamon Fitzgerald, and again about being yourself, because there is a theme in this, I think, about that. about being yourself. And he told a story that I remember when I was listening to him first and interviewing him, I was just bowled over, because it was one of those stories that you're just so glad what didn't happen to you. And also that he was gracious enough to share that with me, my audience, and now it's in a book. Little did he know at the time. But in fairness, I've seen him talk about it on LinkedIn as well. So when people really open up in podcasts, and you know this yourself, Susanne, because you host great podcasts, Change Stories, but you know those little moments where you know you've got this amazing insight into somebody that they possibly don't share all that often. It just feels special. And those moments really stayed in my mind, and they were easily placed in the book. There are a few that didn't make it because I couldn't have everything. But that will just encourage me to write another one.
Well, exactly. And the point you made earlier about how when you first start writing, you want to write everything, like everything you know about everything in the book, don't you? And then you're like, okay, this is just nonsense. It's just reams and reams of stuff. And then you have to start cutting it out. At the point I'm at now, which is really annoying because my final manuscript's gone in, is I now keep seeing things that I want to put in the book, and that's really annoying.
Oh yeah, yeah. It did happen to me. Well, it didn't so much. I said, right, when it's done, it's gone, and that's it. And I really wanted to not make changes like that. And there's just no point, is there? I look at it now and I say, I wish I could have said that instead of that. And then I just go, stop. There's just, you can't.
No.
You know, and some people take years and years to write books. And when I'd have loved to spend another 2 or 3 years writing this and getting that part. But then there's something amazing about just the rawness as well of sharing stuff that maybe you're not totally happy with, but actually, you know, there's enough punch in it that it tweaking something or adding something else in may not actually make any difference.
No, I'm exactly with you on that. I'm at that point now. It's like, well, it's enough. It's a bit like what you were saying about that openness and frankness of sharing stories. I think it's an openness and acceptance that it won't be perfect, because we're not perfect. No one's perfect. We've created a space for writing, and that space is now over, and now it needs to go on and live its own life somewhere else. That's kind of where I'm at. Plus, to be honest, I'm a bit sick of looking at it. So,
yeah.
You know,
and you get to that point too.
I'm happy to move on. You mentioned earlier about some of the stories that you'd heard on your podcast and about that neuroscience and the brain and body. And I found that content really fascinating in the book. I don't know whether others have said this to you, but that was the bit that probably gave me the most emotional reaction reading that, because I found it so fascinating to understand how all of this that is going on within us affects how we show up for ourselves and for others. And I just found it beautifully written, really succinct and easy to understand, but just fascinating to read. Did you know all that already, or did you have to do lots of research to be able to get to that point, to be able to write it so beautifully?
Thank you. That's so lovely to hear that reflected back. I think in a way that's probably the part that's taken me this long to write the book. So in a way, the work of Lisa Feldman Barrett, I mean, the first time I came across Lisa Feldman Barrett was probably around 2019, 2020. And I just consumed her then. I listened to her podcast episodes everywhere she went, every article, well, probably not every, but you know what I mean? I felt like I was stalking her almost. And all of the time, the idea was percolating. And the concepts were percolating. And then I started to do talks. I did a couple of talks around accounting for emotions. And when Will Smith hit Chris Rock at the Oscars, I saw that as such a brilliant way of talking about something like this, because it was a great example that brought it to life. I've shown this to a lot of groups, and there's only been one person in all of the groups that hadn't seen this particular clip that you can watch on YouTube. For me, taking complex because they are complex. The concepts are complex. Taking these complex concepts and making them simple is probably one of my superpowers or talents. But it wasn't easy. It really wasn't easy. And at times I was like, am I oversimplifying them? But what I would do is think about how you would explain this to a 5-year-old.
Yes.
And without it being a 5-year-old. So there was an element of, well, what works here? And actually making it common everyday stuff as well. You know, I talk about a stove, for example, because everybody knows what it's like to touch a hot stove and feel that burn. And just things like that that we take for granted, that are in our lives, are everyday things, and using those to illustrate the really complex stuff. The scientists might come back and say, you butchered it, you got it all wrong, you don't know what you're talking about. But again, for me, it's about awareness. And when I learned that stuff, just like you said there, Susanne, it blew my mind that all of this stuff was going on. And I just felt I had to read really difficult books to get to grips with that. And I wanted somewhere where people could just get a taster. Because I do think there are enough different elements in the book that if you're more interested in your heart or your brain or your gut or emotions or whatever it is, you can follow that rabbit hole. But I just wanted you to see that there's a spectrum of things going on.
And I think part of the reason for me why I found it interesting, but also very engaging, is because I think it made me realise sometimes I and others, we're very hard on ourselves, aren't we? That we take a lot for granted. We don't treat our bodies and our minds as well as we should. And then we expect to be able to carry on and on and on and on doing everything. And actually having that understanding of the way that our brain and our body works means not only can we be kinder to ourselves when perhaps we don't perform as well as we would like, but also we can start to think about, well, when's the best time of day for me to be doing this thing that I have to do? When's the best time of day for me to do some exercise or to do this difficult piece of work? And I think for me, there was that acceptance, like, oh, okay, yeah, sometimes I don't look after myself as well as I could do. I was going to say should, but I'm going to say could do because that's better. And I need to give myself a break when that happens.
And one thing I noticed doing the book, because I followed the circadian rhythm myself, so I got really into managing my energy and managing more than my time, but my energy. And the thing I noticed that I never knew was, and it doesn't seem to even matter what time I have lunch, but at about 2:30 in the day, I have a massive slump. Really, really big slump. And I could have lunch at 12 or I could have lunch at 2. But I just seem to hit a wall at about 2:30 in the afternoon. So now I tend not to do podcast interviews between 2 and 3 and things like that. It's different if I'm with a client. I think you'll rally round, and especially in front of people. But I never knew that. I always knew I was a morning person, but I just assumed that I was able to go through the whole day. But I was probably just pushing myself needlessly. When actually taking a break, just going for 20 minutes outside, just do something to bring that energy back up again.
Interesting. I mean, there's lots of great advice in the book and suggestions about ideas for thinking about. I know for me, I have to be really careful at lunchtime not to eat anything too sugary, because if I have something sugary, I'll be like a corpse by about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So I have to really watch that. That's something I've learned over the years. But, you know, again, looking at your book and reading it really helped me understand all of those things, that there's more than just that going on in the body. So I think I found that part really fascinating and very emotional, as I say, which I was surprised by. I didn't think I would be as emotional, but I was.
It's okay too. I think that's the thing. You know, I do think that we still have this almost apologetic way about feeling our emotions, because we've been told we're not supposed to do that. We're not supposed to show people how we feel or what we're feeling. And actually, it's perfectly normal. And it's worse not to express it. I think that's the thing. And some schools of thought would go as far as to say that a lot of the incidences of poor mental health and disengagement in the workplace is because people don't know how to express the full spectrum of themselves, because they've shut down a part of that. I can't remember if this is in the book now, but I know Anna Bernardes talked about it I mentioned that episode earlier, but she said, if you don't know how to experience sadness, how do you know when you're experiencing happiness? That actually you need to understand the extremes to know. And so I think there's a lot in that. I suppose the other thing is an emotion, or that feeling, is often very fleeting as well.
Yeah. Yes.
So you can let it out and then it's gone.
Yes.
And that's quite freeing.
Yeah. Let it out and move on.
Yeah. Whereas actually when you try to hold it in and become apologetic about it, then something inside of you is going, this isn't right. You're supposed to be letting this out. Come on.
I think your comment about the extremes of emotion is really true. And I think a lot of people that I work with, leaders and managers, are quite afraid of experiencing extreme emotions at work. So not from themselves, but from others. So if they need to deliver some bad news, for example, they are terrified that someone will cry or get angry or whatever. And a lot of the time when I'm working with them, I'll be saying, well, what's the worst that's going to happen? They'll shout at me. Okay, could you survive that? Would you be all right? Yeah. So let's think about how that might pan out. And I think there's this fear, as you say, instilled in us from a young age, not to show these extreme emotions, which is really unfortunate.
It is. And I suppose it's the chicken and egg thing, isn't it? When you sit in front of somebody who shouts at you and you survive, because you will, you realize that you can do it again. It's never going to be pleasant. I mean, to go into a room and have someone shout at you, that's never going to be something you're going to be happy about. You're never going to sit there and feel safe and secure and all of that. But as long as you know you can convince yourself that I can get through this, and I'm not going to shout back, I'm actually going to treat this person with respect and kindness. I think it's almost like a negotiation with yourself. I promise you're going to be safe. Don't worry. The worst that can happen is this. And oftentimes our worst case scenario is so exaggerated.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, how often has that happened to you in your career, that someone has really let loose with their emotions at you personally? It just doesn't happen. We've all had people become upset and people being angry, but it's not at you, it's at the situation. And I think we are our own worst enemies sometimes in imagining this worst case scenario, which actually in reality never happens.
No, and I think what you said there as well about you, it's not at you. We also live in a world according to ourselves.
Yes.
Where we think everyone's thinking about us, everyone's looking at us, everyone's judging us, everyone's unhappy with us or happy with us. Most of the time, no one's giving you another thought. And even when they're sitting in front of you annoyed, they're not annoyed with you. They're annoyed because they messed up, or they're annoyed because they're unhappy. If you think about yourself being annoyed with somebody and you actually find out or go under, why did you really get annoyed? It was because something they said annoyed you, which had something to do with how you felt about what they said. That's an interesting thing when you're in a room and you see reactions of different people to the same news. Not everyone will have the same reaction. And back to the variation again, Susanne. Their reaction is their reaction. And that's what we all have to get more comfortable with or understand better, that they're not reacting to you per se, but something that you've said has triggered something in them. And it's their responsibility then to understand that better. And you can help with that. To me, sometimes it sounds a bit like, oh, but you can say, it seems like something I've said, you've reacted to. Because the other thing I think we have to get better at doing is not saying to people, are you okay?
Yeah.
You just have to yes, no answer. That's not what you want. And by saying, are you okay? The person will probably just go, yeah, of course I am, you know, blah, blah, blah. But actually it's more like, what did I say that brought out that reaction in you? And then that puts the onus back on the other person to figure it out. This isn't easy. It isn't easy, and you'll forget it and you'll mess up. But the more you practice, because I think that's the same with everything. And that was the one thing about neuroplasticity as well, with the brain sciences, the more we repeat something and practice it, we get better at it. It doesn't mean it'll get easier, but it'll become more fluid and fluent. And that's what it's about. So if you want to work better with people and you want to get better out of people, then you have to learn more about people.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. So as we finish, because we're running out of time together, if there were a few key takeaways that you wanted people to get from reading your book, what are they? What would you say to people?
On the cover of the book is a seesaw, and there's a balance thing obviously there with that. But what I did was I said, okay, how can people remember the takeaways of this book? And for me, I made an acronym for seesaw, and the C is S for sleep, because we need sleep. I'm not even going to talk about it. There's no need to talk about it. We just need to sleep. E is for eating and hydration. So nutrition and hydration. And again, we need to get that right. End of. We need water. End of. We don't even need to talk about it. We shouldn't have to. And then the other E is exercise. And for me, exercise isn't about running a marathon or doing CrossFit like I do. Do it, brilliant. But exercise is getting up from your desk and walking up and down the stairs. Anything that brings a bit of movement in and shifts your perspective as well. And exercise is important. The best exercise for you is exercise you're going to do.
Yes.
And that's what's important. And so that's the C side of the seesaw. And then the saw, the S is for sense making. And that is actually using your senses, because we use our senses to make sense of things, but also how can we make sense of the situation we're in? So sense making covers quite a lot. And then A is for awareness. And I guess that comes back to the noticing that we talked about, Susanne. Awareness. It's great to be aware of others, but if we're not aware of ourselves, I think we live in a deluded state again.
Yes.
It's great to go around saying, oh, well, they could have done that better. But actually ask yourself, could I have done that better? And how much better can I do that the next time? And W for wisdom, because all of this comes back to like embodying these things that work and being more compassionate towards yourself, being more understanding. That's all wisdom that you can pass on to others. So yeah, that's my seesaw.
Amazing. I loved the acronym, and I loved the image on the front of the book, actually. I think it really, really stands out. So thank you for letting me come and take over your podcast. It's been an honor. I'm so glad to be involved, and I really do wish you the very best of luck with the book. I know it's going to be amazing. It's going to really change the way that people work. So congratulations.
Well, thank you so much, Susanne. It's been such a pleasure to have somebody actually ask me questions about it and on the spot like this as well. And like I said, the book comes out on Tuesday, the 14th of May on general release, and on Monday, the 13th of May, consider buying the ebook for 99p. And if you're around, show up on LinkedIn. We'll be there at 4 o'clock, and Susanne is joining myself and Matt Phelan, and Matt from the Happiness Index wrote the foreword to this book, and there's quite a few signed up, so it would be great to see you there. Everyone's welcome. Thank you, Susanne, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed the paths we traversed on today's episode. If something rang through for you, be sure to let me know. Or maybe you can share this with someone in your life who would benefit from listening too. And if you enjoy helping others, I'd be so grateful if you would leave a review, so that people who might also be curious about their own life beyond the numbers can discover this podcast too.